Hi, everyone. Again, it's Stephanie with the patient story, and Bruce has just gotten done talking about quite a bit of the treatment, everything. I mean, we went into great detail, Bruce, so thank you for that. Before we go into, and this video was really all about reflections, and I know the highlights are, you've already talked about awareness and early warning. I know you're a big advocate for that. Attitude and self-help, support, giving back, the new normal or a different normal, if you will. Before we dive into that, I would love, you mentioned you were part of the fatigue study at the NIH, and I think this relates to measuring the impacts of exercise, benefits, after radiation. Can you describe that for us? And
Okay.
I'll share the picture you shared with me.
Okay. So during the radiation treatment, you do get tired. It takes a lot out of you because you're literally they're killing tissue inside of you, and so your body's doing a lot of work to try to cope with that. And but they have found that if you do exercise, that reduces the amount of fatigue you feel. But what they didn't know, and what they're trying to figure out, is how much exercise is needed to make it relevant. And so our study was broken into two groups of one that was more high impact, or not impact, but more strenuous exercise versus just slow walking. So basically walking that we were doing on a treadmill, one at a higher speed and then one at a lower speed. I was in the higher speed group. But you know, it was easy for me in the sense that I'm competing with 80-year-olds. I'm like 58 or something, and so it was or 52, I mean. So it was a lot easier for me. But I got my cancer a lot earlier age than they thought it was normal. So, but that's something to do is exercise during your radiation treatment. That will reduce the amount of fatigue you have. I don't know the results yet of the NIH study on that, and they might be out by now. But that's something to keep in mind, is to try and stay active during radiation.
Right, right. No, that's a great tip. I mean, I think in general, people like to say, don't overexert, but move around, keep your body going, be active. So
And
a very important message there. When we last were talking at the last video segment, I just thought it was so important that you brought up how you talked to people at work. You said, hey, let's talk about this, but no one wanted to talk right then in a group setting. It was, hey, knock, knock, one-on-one. Now I feel comfortable. I don't really know what the question is here. Just, I guess, do you have a message for other maybe men who are watching this in terms of the importance of being able to talk, express, share just
right.
what that's done for you?
Yeah, I think what I've learned out of that is that men want to know, and they should know. I mean, it's something that's, again, just not talked about a lot, so they don't hear it through hearsay very often. It's not on TV. You don't have a lot of commercials. So I have seen some commercials lately, and there's more things like sporting events, baseball, football, and doing their prostate cancer awareness days. And particularly people of color in particular are at higher risk than the rest of us. And so it's and it's happening at an earlier age, just like a lot of cancers.
Yeah.
And I think we'll find that going forward, there's less talk about cancers in terms of a specific organ as opposed to a different type of cancer. I think there's similarities between these cancers that they didn't know before. And so, but the fact that it does kill so many men every year, that's one message that you get. But you also hear the message that most men don't die of it. Most men, it's very mild, which is true. It's just affects so many people that there's a lot of people that do die from it, and it's so preventable these days. And that's the real message. That unlike some cancers, pancreatic or something like that, it's very difficult to try and detect or even thwart once you get it.
Right.
Cancer, the prostate cancer, is immensely treatable, and if you catch it early. And there's a lot of options to treat it these days. If you're going to get cancer, now's a great time to get it, because there's a lot of advancements in the treatment.
Right.
And so the PSA test is something that's so easy to do, and you should be doing it, at age 40 and up, in my opinion. every year for men. And don't disregard it. Don't, again, there's no fasting to deal with it. It's such a simple thing to do, but it's something that can really save your life.
Yeah, it just taking the preventative sort of steps preemptively, taking
Yeah,
care of yourself in that way. So I think that's a very critical message. You also talk about self-help,
right.
and sort of doing your homework. Yeah, what does this mean for you?
So for me, the self help is, being aware of what the science is, being aware of trying to separate, what's out there on the internet versus what's real truth. And there's a lot of resources for that. I mean, the internet's not the best place to go look for this information. Your cancer support groups, your us too, some of those groups. There's a lot of um, nonprofit prostate cancer advocacy groups that they'll weed through all of that for you and largely get you the information you need. And take your time and try to sort it out, because again, there are so many options now for treatment. There's not just clear cut of which one you should do. And the doctors, you know, if using a different analogy, if you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right? And so, surgeons are more likely to, recommend surgery. Radiologists are probably more likely to recommend radiology. So you have to sort of go through and meet with them and take your time to try and find out what are the pros and cons out of each.
Right.
And I did think that most of the radiologists and surgeons I talked to were open in giving you the other side of the coin. But it does help to go talk to a range and then go to these support groups. So you're helping yourself decide and then keep yourself healthy.
Yes.
For me, the biggest life-saving thing that I was in control of was my fitness and my diet. And those have such a huge impact, of finding out more and more how much of an impact that has on, not just other diseases, not just prostate cancer, but other diseases as well. And
Absolutely.
so that is really the thing you do have control over, is your attitude and your diet and your exercise.
Right. And by the way, you had also mentioned something earlier in our conversation about how your sister was really helpful, and almost bringing in another perspective in doing the homework can be really helpful. Just because maybe it's a different vantage point, right? You're more maybe emotionally invested, and it can lead to tunnel vision sometimes. So I thought that was incredibly great tip, is if you have someone you can rely on who can kind of give another perspective and do some of that homework.
And one thing we found was useful, and if my wife joins us later, we can talk more about it. But was just again trying to keep the moment light, and particularly like when you're in the waiting room with all the other men that are waiting to get treated, to not be a downer, not to be doom and gloom.
Right.
And I had the advantage in a way, because my condition, my Gleason scores were far worse than most of the men that I ever came into contact with.
Yes.
So I could kind of say, look, if they could see me being with humor still, and sense of humor,
Right.
that it helped, I think, make them feel okay. He's a lot worse off than I am, and he's okay, so I can be okay.
Right.
And I remember attending one session where a book author had come on, and they talked about him surviving. His big thing was surviving such an aggressive cancer. And as he talked, he gave his Gleason score, and if I recall, it's like a 6.7. And I thought, wow, mine's worse than that. So that's not giving me a whole lot of comfort here. so, but uh, but it is survivable. I mean, it's, 20 years ago, not even even 10 years ago, not as survivable. But if you seek the help, if you do the early warning, and you get like the family member to maybe do some of that research for you, so it's not too depressing,
Right.
and sort it out. It's something it's a something you need to be doing.
I think that this is something we'd love to dive in more to with Lisa in just a few minutes. I think as we wrap up this section of your reflections, Bruce, you talk about, like a different normal. And I think, you've gone through so many changes, and it was a lot of mental, roller coaster, and it was a lot of physical, experiences you had to undergo that changed a lot of different parts of your life. And so describe what that means to you, a different normal. And if you could wrap up into this too, maybe a last message for those men and other women too, dealing with other cancers, sort of a last word, after you experienced what you did.
So I think the phrase that you hear people say, that it's not, it's living with cancer, and that's really appropriate. You're living with that knowledge that, okay, it could come back. It might get me in the end. I have no intention of doing so, but it's something that you just realize that it's part of your life now. And if you accept it as, okay, that's just what it is, I'm just going to move on and keep living my life. And you still have, they took a lot of my lymph nodes out, so I still have a hard time adjusting to the temperatures in rooms sometimes. But you don't want cancer to rule your life, but it's a part of your life. And I feel myself, I've pretty much lived a pretty rich life in terms of adventure and doing things I've wanted to do. So I can't say that cancer suddenly made me appreciate life more. I've always appreciated life from way back and actually in college, where we read a book that talked about a newlywed couple. The man had written it, and his wife had fallen through the ice skating, and they'd just been married. And that really hit home to me. It's like, wow, life can change so quickly. But so I've always embraced doing lots of things that I wanted to do and try to enjoy life the best I can. But it's just another piece of that life. It's just another part of yourself, a part of what you have to go through. I did, knowing how severe my cancer was, I rethink my retirement plan a little bit. I rethink my investment strategies a little bit. We have our contingency plan that if it comes back in an aggressive way, we know what things we want to do that we hadn't hit on our little bucket list yet, maybe. But I think it's really just not letting it rule your life, but knowing it's a part of your life, and you want to rule it as opposed to it ruling you.
Right. Well said. Couldn't put it better myself. I really appreciate that, Bruce. Thank you so much for sharing your personal insights after going through this experience. Typically, this is when we wrap up, but I'm so thrilled that we're going to be able to do one more quick section with Lisa, your partner, who has been amazing from everything that I've heard you talk about. And we'll talk about that caregiver perspective, because as we know, a diagnosis hits way more lives, many more lives than just the patient, him or herself. So Bruce, thank you. And the next time we see you, hopefully we'll have Lisa right next to you.